Ready? Hello? Hi. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. And I'm going to save this little prayer from the Arizal before we start. Tefillah kodem halimud mi'ha'ari l'zchuto yigen aleinu. Has anyone been to the Kever Ari?
Yeah. Oh, in
Tzfat.
Yeah, and the shul, right?
Yeah, he's got a shul there, yeah.
Oh, no, you need it.
Yeah, it's a very, very special place. Very, very interesting place to go. There's an interesting thing written on his cover. Let's see, what is it? It's Shabbos davening, Mizmor David. It's the end of Psalm 23. Tov, that's what it is, sorry. It's a little early still. I haven't had my 3 cups of coffee. Tov v'chesed yudfuni. Rosh Tevos, it adds up to 26. So only good and love from Hashem should follow me all the days of my life. So Arizal says that you should have that in mind before you say Kiddush. And that's what's written on his cover. Isn't that wild? Unbelievable thing. It's so simple. It's funny the things we remember, you know. Tov v'chesed yudfuni.
So the
Rosh Tevot are as Tov's Aleph and Tet is 10, Vav Chesed is 16, Yud Funi Yud is 26. That's the Yud Ke Vav Ke. That's we should have that in mind when we say Kiddush. It's such a neat thing to have. Such a practical thing that he has on his cover. It's something you can take away and then think, you know. Isn't that neat? No, it's some of this. I noticed it when I was there. I always wonder sometimes if I remember these things that was like actually real, but but I'm pretty sure that's actually what it says on his cover. Of course, as great as Arizal, he was also just as down to earth and involved with people. You know, he wasn't. Very much a real Rebbe. People came to him, and he was not aloof in any way. Interesting enough. Okay, Ribono mimad me'amnim avrach v'gasikos modim anachnu v'necha noyim he'lo v'seinu b'kedu v'shtachavah b'kir tanu tosachalav v'nasacha v'nasa kodesh Tachalanu chayek v'sodos tosacha kedoshim ma'anu v'necheinu asher sisa imanu chesed v'lo kazeh al kein nachnu matim davnachnu shtimcho v'tislach achol chatoseinu v'avnaseinu v'avnaseinu avdilim beineinu v'beinecha v'cheinu v'necha v'necha Chonein eslo v'veinu v'yastal v'secho v'takshibos necha v'vorim ha'ele v'tiftach v'veinu alam v'sodas v'asach v'yeh v'vodenu zet nachas ruach v'fnei ch'chmodach et b'rech nichoach ta'atil v'inu or v'konish v'sein v'chol v'chinosein v'shiyas notzitz v'nitzotzos av'lech ha'kedoshim asher al yadam galis v'fnei ha'ele ba'olam v'zchusam zchus avosam zchus tosam v'nusam Kush Asami Molan and the Balnik Ashav Ele V'zchusam Tirvineinu v'mashan liv v'amdim k'mamar 9 Zmiros Yisrael Gal in het abit in de flaus met zoals zeggen ki adnoit in gaf met die das is wel het zo in sorry go Ali. It's interesting that always try to take a little bit out of this prayer something new. That she's having that's right. Something new this year, right? Okay. Something new out of the tefillah of Arizal. This learning should give nachat, so to speak, before God. It's always an interesting idea to think about that our actions somehow can give pleasure to the creator of the entire universe. It's something to think about how that's possible, and I think the only way it's possible is V'shi'etnotetzu nitzotzos Tatzilina or makonish masena b'chol b'chinasena. V'shi'etnotetzu, right? Nitzotzos avadecha kedoshim. The only way it works, I think, really, seems to have to do first with our neshamas, right? Like, I mean, we should all live long, but ultimately the body is going, the neshama stays forever. So, it seems like when we do something, it has to do with our neshama, so then it's something very special, and it can give pleasure to God, right? It's spiritual. But I guess the concept is also, right, if you think about it, we believe in the spiritual world also. So God has all the, He already has all the souls. You know, He doesn't, the soul is not necessarily what God needs, right? It's the soul, when it's in the body, that's something special. So the soul, when it is in the body, so there's a lot of pressures to do all sorts of things. And we have a lot to do. Physically, we have all sorts of things we're doing with our lives that are some more or less spiritual, or the spirituality is more revealed or more concealed. But to sit down and learn, even just for a little bit, sha'achas, like 1 hour, but not even literally an hour, just a time. You sit down and you learn, means that your soul, at least in that moment, concepts of the soul or conceptions of what's meaningful in life is more important than something physical. Even though, really, you're inside a physical, you're enclosed within a physical body. And I think that's the concept of nachas ruach. That it's not the soul. Obviously, if you really think about it, the body by itself, physicality by itself, couldn't, even by its very nature, give God, so to speak, any pleasure. But it's the revelation and spirituality God already has. He's God, right? He's got the whole, right? Revealed entirely in every world, maybe except this. So it's the soul in this world. It's the physicality and the spirituality as united, as connected, and as kind of working together. And we learned actually in Parshat Parshat. I went through a little bit. It was a little too heavy. Parshat Parshat. I mean, it's beyond what the Zohar does with Parshat Parshat. It's the Tikkun Zohar, and then even the Zohar. We're learning the Midrash and Elam. It's beyond, really. I mean, it's enormous, and it's lengthy and very, very detailed and incredible. One thing I noticed in there is that the this world and the next, the Zohar says, was like really created as like one. It's one system. Like we tend to see, I might have mentioned it last week, we tend to see like there's physicality and there's spirituality. I have times when I'm spiritual, I have times when I'm not. And really what's going on is that when we have times that like it's spiritual, it's a yantiv, or we have a moment in our davening, where all of a sudden we have this little conception of something, we open up a little bit. What it is that's the real world opening up. The real world is that the physical and the spiritual are completely united. Both worlds are, says Zohar, are absolutely one. It's one system. And so it makes sense. That's really, I think, nachas ruach. I mean, that's the concept, or the reality of this world being somehow elevated. But it's like we live so long in a world that's not elevated that we start to think that the non-elevated world is actually the real world. When actually the real world is the world that's elevated. An elevated world, a world really full of spirituality and spiritual teachings and beauty and niceness, nice things. That's the real world, the way God envisions the world as unfolding. And eventually we'll get there. It might take some time. You never know. But so anyway, so that's just a little concept from the Arizal. I think that makes sense in terms of nachat ruach. So this week we have Avram Avinu with Parshat Lecha, and it's always a very exciting thing. Really, the first Jewish person is Avram Avinu, and L'chaim. I'm such an addict. It's terrible. So last week we talked a little bit about Noach and what it means to be a tzaddik. Hey, come on in. Morning. Hey.
Sorry we're late.
No, it's hey. Just getting going here. Thank you. Thanks, yeah. We talked about Noah, and what the conceptions of a tzaddik and what it means to be a tzaddik, and how learning to channel our kind of innate selfishness into things which ultimately give to others is the kind of way by which the world keeps going. The world kind of stands. We put our efforts into things which give us pleasure. If we're a musician, we learn how to play music, and we practice a lot in it. And the practicing seems very self-involved, and it is. You're sitting in a room by yourself and practicing for hours, for years. But eventually, all that learning ends up, and all that self-focus ends up enabling that person to then give to others. And so it's kind of this. This is, I think, this is one of the concepts we took from Parshat Noach. Avram Avinu, it seems, is like a totally different, even a much more different thing, right? We learned Noach. We were learning yesterday a little bit that Noach really, in a certain way, you kind of can't blame him. Like Noach, in one way, is spectacular. The Arizal writes that Noach becomes later on as Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Noach comes back as Moshe in a Gilgul. It's like a really, really fascinating concept. But in a way, so Noach is spectacular. He's unbelievable. He saves the whole world. We all, basically, according to the Torah, we all come from him. So Noach, it's clear Noach was, looking outside his window, and he saw it was a really violent society in a lot of ways. There was theft and violence and all sorts of perversion, but it was violent. And Noach was a very, very sensitive person. And so it was scary, And so he didn't, so God says to him, it's okay, I'm going to save you, build an ark. And he says, okay. So in a way, you kind of can't blame him. His persona was so as the Kush's flavor, it's almost too humble for his own good, right? And he was scared, and rightfully so. He didn't know. He didn't understand that he actually had the power to go out in the world and change things. He didn't realize that he actually could do that. So therefore, the Arizal comes back as Moshe Rabbeinu, who then, of course, changes the world forever and gives to the world kind of this foundation. And the whole world's really still running on. But Avram Avinu, it's clear that Avram Avinu, just in contrast, he really didn't. In a way, he was really selfless. Like he didn't. He looked at the world and he thought, okay, if I do this, so Nimrod, the Midrash says Nimrod threw him in this fire. It's this whole amazing story. So he thought to himself, if I go against Nimrod, he's gonna kill me. And he thought, well, so what? I'm going against him anyway. He's totally, totally beyond himself. His way of being was just fine. Let him throw me in the fire. I'm going anyway. That's really the beginning. That's the interesting part. He was totally selfless. And so then, of course, he didn't die, and there's a famous midrash. Again, whether you take it literally or not, the point of the midrash where he gets thrown in this fire is that he was willing to totally give of himself. Not even willing to, wanting to. It was, and of course that was the first big opening, right? Because he was the first person first person in the world, we're told, who discovers God, and is also the first person in the world who feels there's something in his life that's more important than his life. There's certain things that are not worth kind of, there are certain things that are so worthwhile that according as Avram Avinu says, you give your lives 1,000 times for it. It's so again, this is, if you think about it in terms of what we talked about the Zohar and Bereshis, this is kind of like the first person to again connect the soul with the body, right? The Olam Haba, the conceptions of something which is again more important than physical life, and connect it in this life. And so that's the. So there's more. Hey, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. There's more. Again, he's the first person to connect the other world, or the conceptions of something that's more important than physicality and more important than himself, into his very life, and then that became a platform from which he started talking to people. Because people, it's very impressive, right? So the story in the Midrash goes that Nimrod threw him in the fire, and then it didn't. He was ready to. That said, fine. He was the first person who was mechaven to die of Kiddush Hashem, and he jumped in, and they threw him in the fire. But of course, the Midrash says, well, the fire didn't touch him. Right, which again is a beautiful metaphor for Jewish lives. In a very deep way, in an ultimate way, the fire never touches us. Same with Avram Avinu. Right, even though in the in the moment it does, but in the ultimate way it doesn't. And so he's the first. So he jumps in. So then the world takes a look at this and says, "Wow, not only this person is willing to go beyond himself so much." That this concept of monotheism is so important. This concept of one God is so important that he's like he'd rather jump in a fire than get rid of this idea. That must be a really important idea. And so people started to be involved, and people wanted to know what he had to say. So it's this to begin with, Avram Avinu discovered the concept of selflessness. But from a place of not like, oh, I'm so bad, and like I have no self, but from a place of, here's something that's really amazing. Here's God who's so it's this concept of one God. So excited about it, and so awesome that it went right to his very core, and so he was therefore able to and wanted to kind of give of himself entirely for this, and he did. And so it's very okay. So the Zohar starts at Lech Artzcha, Rabbi Abba Patach Amar Shimu Elai Abirei Lev Havachokim Mitzdaka. Okay, so I looked this up before we started. Again from Yeshaya. It's always amazing. The Zohar is always, at least in the beginning, always quoting Yeshaya. It's really pretty amazing. I didn't realize that. That's a pasuk. Let's see what Rashi says. It is pasuk Yud Beit in chapter Mem Vav 46. Let's see, does Rashi say anything? Yud Aleph. Fuck, no. I don't think he does actually. No. Yud Aleph. No. Hear me call, Shimu Elai, hearken to me, or listen to me, or towards me, Abirei Lev, like the very strong of heart, I guess. It's not, Abir is not merely strong, it's like powerfully strong of heart. Hawachokim mitzdaka, who are far from tzedakah, who are far from righteousness, or receiving righteousness, being righteous. It's an interesting pasuk. So that's the Zohar quotes. So Shimu Elai Abirei Lev, the Zohar says, Kama takif in libayo dechayvei. L'chaman shvila be'orchei d'oraisa v'lo mistaklin behu v'libayut kifin lo mahadrin b'tiyuvta l'gabi marayon v'akron abirei lev. So the Zohar, it teaches us something really nice here, right? And actually, it's teaching us something I think that the prophet Isaiah is teaching. It says, Abiri Lev, the strong of heart. He says, the amazing thing about people who maybe aren't so connected to the Torah in an outward way is that they have a very strong heart. Abiri Lev. They have a really strong heart. Right? Because they're in, so to speak, they're in a world where they really feel that they're relying on themselves. They don't feel the need, so to speak, to look to guidance from God or to to get strength from God. So they really have this tremendous, in a sense, they're really very strong. They're very strong-hearted.
Isn't that called an ego?
Well, for sure. It's interesting. Yeah.
Negative ego.
Well, and it is. What's interesting about this is, I think you're right. No, for sure. The interesting thing about the Zohar is that it's like Reb Shlomo Alav Shalom said. It's all said about. He used to go to prisons a lot, and he said, kind of joking but also kind of serious. He said, the thing about you meet prisoners, he says, is the truth is that these are people of action. He said the problem is that they never learned where to put them. These are people who they're really serious. The truth is. So he says the whole thing is we have to try to teach them to learn to put their action into something really nice as opposed to something really gross. And so it's kind of like the same. It's the same thing here. It's like it's true. I mean, really, it's like strong people, And so the thing is, it's like the Zohar is saying. First of all, the Zohar is teaching us always down the chatzachut. Really, always, even people. Fine. It's like they're all. Someone's a little bit against, or they're not connected to Torah. Judge them positively. Oh, what a strong person! Amazing. How strong they are, right? But the other thing, again, the flip side is harachokim mitzdaka, right? Midrasa kemaraitas. Tzedakah here says Zohar is the Torah. They're far away from the Torah. So the equation of the Torah with tzedakah, right? So Avraham Avinu is going to talk about. He's one of the first person to understand the whole conception of tzedakah. Of tzedek, but really tzedakah also means giving. It come to mean obviously giving and helping people get what they need when they don't have, and making the world a place where people get what they need, or even though they don't maybe deserve it. It's not even a question. That's the thing about Avraham Avinu, right? Avraham Avinu, it's not a question whether you deserve it or not. It's not. There's no, do you deserve it? Don't you deserve it? It's not even. Doesn't even come in the picture. It's just he's giving whatever. When someone has a need, he's given. Period. So it's wonderful to be strong of heart, right? You have a strong heart. You want to do things. It's fantastic. The only problem is, like you said, it could lead to not being open to, again, what other people need, right? Well, they'd say, well, I'm really strong, and I'm doing this. Why can't they do what they're doing? So, right? So it's great, and seemingly a person's very strong, but, right? As it said, it's very far away from giving. It's very far away from any understanding in the world of things do happen that make us a little bit weaker, and we do need things, and people's lives don't always go. Even if they made the mistakes themselves, it's not so simple. People need help, and they need things, and it can be a way of kind of being very strong of heart, of compensating for a very deep understanding of your own lack, and so you kind of compensate. So I'm really, really strong, and you go out and you do. That's kind of the opposite of, in a sense, of the Torah. It's not that the Torah wants us that we should be weak, right? It's just that the Torah wants us to be real. And so the amount of strength that I have It's not even comparable to, the physical sun that gives us light and, keeps our lives going, really, in a certain sense. My actual strength is really, even if I'm really, really strong, even if, live 90 years, 100 years, 120 years, whatever, it's not that much, really, in terms of strength, actual strength. And so, when we learn, when we connect with the Torah, the concept is that we should open up to God, right? That's the whole point of learning. We should open up to God, and the strength that God has, if we kind of almost abandon our own strength and open up to the strength that's beyond us, which is the strength which is God's strength, which of course is much, much greater than our own, but beyond even, right? And in that way, and this is what we're talking about. So Avram Avinu, remember, so he's the one we were talking about before. He's the one who, he's the first person to do this. He's the first person to say, there's something greater than me that's more important than my very life. And so therefore, when he really actualized that, and he jumped in that fire, so to speak, then he opened himself up to God's power, which is infinite, right? Because he realized, in and of himself, there's really, if you really think about it, we really don't have any power. The only power we possibly have is with the neshama, with the opening up, right? And so it's almost like a conception of human consciousness whereby we have nothing. We open ourselves up, and we have. It's hard to explain, but it's both losing oneself and finding oneself at the same time. We're losing ourselves in that ephemeral self, that self that that has all the myriad wants and desires and everything. That self is really quite weak in a sense, no matter how strong it is, because it's limited to itself. Whereas the self that's understands its own weakness and recognizes it to begin with, and understands really, truthfully, we don't have any power. Right? It's like Rabbi Nachman says, the less power you have, the more powerful you are, because you realize that the strength you have, therefore, has to come from God. And so your strength, therefore, if you're really open, if you really understand your own powerlessness, then you're open to God's power and God's strength. And that's infinite.
It's interesting. I mean, it kind of sounds like what you're saying about Abraham. It's like he took this next step toward strength more than Noach did, because he had this concept of tzedakah. So not only it was about his own strength, but he connected to God, and in that connecting to God, he realized that what does God want? God wants a person to connect to me via giving tzedakah, giving connected to the Torah and giving to others. So that's like the real strength. So that like maybe and that was like what Noah couldn't do. He he couldn't see beyond all these people's issues and stuff and say, you know what, let's let me try to connect to you in some way. He just all of his strength could only deal with himself and his family. And so they were able to obviously like restart the world, but which is huge, obviously. Right. But in a way, it was like he didn't have the strength to do the tzedakah on the human level outside of the animals in his immediate family to reach out to others.
That's so interesting. And I think what's interesting is also that all the stuff that's going on, it's all an acting out of this. It's all an acting out of people unable to admit their own actual weakness. Right, well, our own frailty, our own mortality. It's all people unable to realize that. And you're right. And Noah, truthfully, was a little bit that way too. Tzaddik b'dor tamim haya b'dor.